Welcome to Mooney Reads, and welcome to a mid-year check-in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what my reading year has been like so far, and I'm going to answer some questions from the mid-year freakout tag that have been kind of modified. I took a look at the original questions and then also the version that I used last year, and so I'll talk about my reading that way as well. To start things off, I've read 29 books in the year so far. I haven't done really any wrap-ups this year so far. I have filmed a quarter of the year wrap-up, and I plan on filming a second quarter wrap-up once I'm finished with this. So you'll get to hear a little bit more about all of the books that I've read so far whenever those get up. About a third of these have been nonfiction, which I think is about where I gravitate towards regularly. The past couple years, my reading has been kind of approaching half and half, but I specifically focused on that in those couple years. This year, it's just been vibes. And I've been reading a lot of graphic novels, so that's really contributed to it. I do pretty consistently read nonfiction. Particularly, there's a lot that I've read and just haven't finished yet. But that's where we're at the moment. I've been reading mostly print books, which is pretty normal. Not as many audiobooks as in the past, and slightly more digital, but the only digital books that I've really been reading are graphic novels that I borrowed from the library, which is pretty normal if I'm going to read an ebook. Looking in terms of how it's gone each month, I have a three-way tie for the number of books. However, in May, I read longer books. I read more pages. I ended up reading, I think, 4 romance novels in the span of like a week or so. So that really did it for May. My average rating is pretty consistent with my like overall average rating, which is about 4.2. However, the mode or like the most ratings, the books that the number that has the most books under it, is a little bit different. I typically have a lot of books within, I think, 4, and then a lot of books even more within 5. And this year, I've been rating a lot of things 4.25. I have had more books that have come up in kind of some of these lower, like 3.25 to 3.75, but I don't think that's necessarily bad. I've just had, I think a lot of books that I rated lower because of kind of more like objective things, but that doesn't mean that I enjoyed them less. Like some of the romance novels, I could see where things could have maybe been better in a certain kind of way, but I still really enjoyed the experience. So in that way, I don't think that the star ratings really show the full story. And then finally, we have stats about the kind of vibes of the stories that I've been reading. A lot of emotional stories, but then also a lot of lighthearted and hopeful stories, and then a fair amount that are reflective or funny. So do with that what you will. All of these stats are coming from Storygraph, for those who may not know. And in terms of like recording my reading, on top of Storygraph, that's really great. Goodreads, which I only use because it's kind of like, I think, more helpful for the authors. I've been using Pagebound, which has been a lot of fun. It's a little bit more community driven than Storygraph, which is really like for like the solo, like the statistics. It does have the challenges, which I really appreciate. But Pagebound has like a forum sort of thing that's kind of like Goodreads but better. And they have more forums. They have like a general forum that's really good, and they have a lot of really neat challenges that the mods put together or have put together with the community and some of the top contributors. So that's really interesting. I still like to use, like, they now have statistics as well and some graphics that are pretty cool. I still have a preference for Storygraph because you can add things that aren't necessarily books for like page count, and that's useful for me. Not to mention your own personal challenges and stuff like that, but those are both really cool and I'm enjoying them. Now for the tag questions. So the first question is, how is your reading year going? And I would say it's going okay. This has not been like the most active reading year that I've ever had, but I'm still reading some good stuff, so I would say that's pretty good in that regard. I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself so that I don't ditch books so often. I have a few different challenges or things that I've been trying to do that I've been ebbing and flowing, but like I said, I'm trying to be a little chill about it. So then we have, what has been the best book you have read so far this year? And I have two books to talk about for this. One is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, which is a really great collection that I think most of it was written throughout the 80s, but it remains really applicable to the state of everything now. Audre Lorde is a really prolific Black lesbian writer. I technically read most of this collection a few years ago, and then I read the other half of it this year. So some of the essays I'm a little bit more distance from, but it was still really great, and definitely one of the best books that I've read this year. And then the other book that I was going to mention for this is Hijab, Butch Blues by Lamya H, which is a memoir written by a queer Muslim person who grew up like as someone who immigrated within Swana and then later immigrated to the United States, and talking about their experience of all of that, but also of discovering their queerness and how it relates to their religion, and talking about these various uh, people in the Quran and either how their struggle relates to the authors or how they learned about that and how that sort of impacted their life. It was really beautiful. I listened to it on audiobook. Would highly recommend it. The next question is, what is the best sequel you've read this year so far? And really, I don't read a ton of series. Graphic novels would be the main place for series. So the one I'm going to talk about here is the Tea Dragon Festival and the Tea Dragon Tapestry, which are sequels to the Tea Dragon Society, which I read a while back. And this is a really sweet series. I think that the follow-ups are probably better than the first one. I have had some distance from the first one, but they talk a lot about a lot of different things. There are a variety of different characters. A lot of them are queer. There are also dragons that are really cute and sweet. So it's just a good series overall, especially if you need to pick me up, and are open to middle grade. Next, I have my favorite reread. I have been doing several rereads this year, which I've been happy about. This Pride Month, I reread a couple of books by the first gay author that I knowingly read. And one of them aged sort of poorly. And the other one was like, okay, but I'm glad that I revisited them. The only other book that I think I've been able to reread is the first volume of Dinosaur Sanctuary, which was very good. It's a manga that's basically like Jurassic Park, but make it cozy a little bit. And there's a lot of cool sciencey stuff. Like at the end of each chapter, the scientist that they consulted for some of the artwork and different things, it talks to you a little bit about why they chose certain things, like the way that the dinosaurs sit or whatever. But I reread the first book so that I could continue on with the series. I've read the first two so far and plan to continue. I have book 3, and as soon as I finish that, I'll probably go out and buy the rest. Next, we have a genre you've been really loving or reading a lot of. Like I mentioned, I've been reading a lot of graphic novels, particularly a lot of middle grade graphic novels. They're just really nice. I think my year started out pretty terribly. And I don't know. I guess I've just been finding a lot of comfort in some of the middle grade books, and it's really cool to see how they, like with some of the stuff that I've been reading, how they address certain topics in a way that not only like helps me to process it in like a calmer way, but also, I don't know, some of them are things that I wish that I would have read or had the opportunity to read when I was smaller. The other thing that I've ended up reading a lot of, in May, I read, I think, 4 romance novels. They were all fake dating romance, which is just so random. I guess that the premises all sounded neat to me at some point because they were all ones that I owned. And I had a really fun time. Like I kind of said when I was talking about star ratings, the star ratings that I gave them could be deceiving. I had a lot of fun reading those. So I definitely think that going back to romance at some point would definitely be fun to do. Especially now that I've read a little bit more of it, I think I can like manage my expectations in a better way, if that makes sense, or I kind of like understand the genre a little bit better. The next question is, what has the biggest disappointment of the year been? I will say that I've read worse books this year than the one that I'm going to talk about. Will Grayson was not one that I would recommend to anyone in 2026, but I knew that going into it. So, with that in mind, it is not, this book that I'm going to talk about is not a bad book. It is just a book that did not live up to my expectations, and that is Stag Dance by Tori Peter. I loved Detransition Baby so much when I read it, so I had really high expectations of this book. I've also recently read a really good trans short story collection. It made it to like the top of my favorites list last year, Crawl by Max Delson, and I didn't expect this to be that or anything like that. But I just thought it was going to be really great, and it ended up being okay. I liked parts of each of the stories, and I see where she was going with it. But the thing is, each of them, no, most of the stories, I think, had some sort of pacing or length issue. The first story, I wanted a whole novel of. The third story, I put down because I got bored. I put it down for a couple months because I was just tired of being in the mountains. It should have been like at least a third of it probably could have been shaven off. Like I kind of got what she was going for. And then by the time you get to the last story, like the last story is good. I'm glad that I read the rest of it, but I would have enjoyed the last story more if the pacing of the previous stories had lined up, because the last story intentionally, I think, doesn't tell you the whole thing or doesn't go into everything as much as it could. And I like what she did with it, but in context with everything else, it felt um unsatisfying. So yeah, it's worth the read. I just had really high expectations for this, and that's on me because some literary short story collections have that issue of, I think, being so close yet so far away from me. So I should have gone in with maybe more tempered expectations. The next question is the book that was your biggest surprise, and for that one, I have Angelica and the Bear Prince. This is a YA graphic novel that focuses on a girl who's basically recovering from burnout and is trying to reintegrate different things into her life. So she's going back to help out with a play and trying to have that be her one like extracurricular. Throughout the story, you really get a good sense of her relationship with the community and her relationship with her best friend. There's also a romance that is integrated into the story, but it is not the thing. So, and I really enjoyed that. I kind of thought that it would be the central thing because of the cover. And I knew going into it that it was about someone recovering from burnout. So I was expecting it to be relatable, and I was expecting it to be romancy. What I didn't expect was for it to totally make me cry. Um, while this is definitely about burnout and burnout recovery, it is really about grief, especially like long-term grief. And I think in kind of an indirect way, like compounded or ambiguous grief on top of grief from loss. I You get to see how different characters kind of react to ongoing grief, and that really alters how people act. Maybe the resolution happens less believable just because people are typically messy, but this is similar to the Moth Keeper in how like it just made me feel really like held. It was just like cozy and soft, but like while talking about the emotions that you don't typically, that don't really get that sort of focus, I guess. So like I knew that this was going to be good and cute, but I didn't expect it to hit me nearly as hard as it did. This one is definitely going to make it to some of my top favorites of the year. Next, we have a new favorite author, and I'm not sure if I really have one just because I don't have many people that I've read more than one thing from. But I'm going to use this question to talk about one of the books that I really liked, and I think the way that the author went about writing and also art in a more broad way. The book that I'm going to be talking about is After Silence by Avram Finkelstein. And this is about the collective that made the Silence Equals Death graphic that is probably the most well-known bit of like AIDS art. Maybe save for some of Keith Haring's stuff. It's really heavily associated with ACT UP, but it was made before ACT UP. And he talks about being a part of that collective and also being a part of various collectives in ACT UP, what it was like making this art piece, and also just like experiencing the AIDS epidemic and having partners and friends pass away. And really what art is supposed to do, he kind of makes, he distinguishes between sort of what he intended his work to be versus art in like the aesthetic sense. He kind of saw things like Silence Equals Death and like some of these other projects as the beginning of an action that other people would then continue. And towards the end, you learn that he currently works with artists to do pop-up collectives that are more activist oriented. And I also listened to him talk in at a conference that they have online. The conference happened God knows how long ago, but it's on YouTube. And I watched it. So I'll put a link to that. But it was really interesting to hear him and some of the other artists talk. So this was really interesting. His like perspective on art was really cool. And I also like how he blended the memoir and history and how he talked about writing about history and also a lot of what he talks about in terms of grief. Now, the next couple questions that typically come up with the mid-year freakout tag are new fictional crush and new favorite fictional character. At this point in my reading life, neither the fictional crush thing definitely doesn't resonate. The favorite character thing, I feel like there are so many characters, and thinking about all of the things that I've read, that would be really hard to pick. So what I'm going to talk about instead is some characters that I found really relatable. Particularly, I'm going to talk about the main characters in The Proposal by Sonita Reyes. This one was probably my favorite of the fake dating romance books that I read in May. And I really loved it for several reasons. First of all, I think it was really made for me to like it a lot because it also had the built-in best friends to lovers, which is the best in my opinion. But also there were some really serious things that were happening amidst the romance, which is true of the other books that I read as well, but this one felt like more realistic issues that would be happening with higher stakes. I think that in the wrong author's hands, these things could have been handled really poorly. The whole like main reason that they're fake dating has to do with one of them not having citizenship, and then the other kind of serious topic that goes on is talking about the other character and his former relationship that was really abusive. Now, for why I'm talking about this for characters that I really resonated with, I've got my reading journal out to kind of see what my thoughts were actually directly after. Kenny was getting out of a toxic relationship and falling in love, or more like coming to terms with the fact that he had already fallen in love with his best friend. And that is a specific situation that I've been in. Now, the toxic ex character in the proposal is it's a whole different situation, so I'm not comparing that. But a lot of kind of what I saw internally from Kenny was just really kind of deeply relatable in that way, and this sort of people pleasing, highly relatable. And then Han is also, again, realizing you're in love with your best friend, classic, but also deeply, deeply represses his emotions and is going through the process of excavating all of the stuff that he is trying to bury deep down. Also a process that's very relatable. So, I don't really know what that says about me or for the characters in the proposal. But I think part of why I really liked the book is because, like, not only is it really solid, I liked a lot of the components, but it was also just, like, each of their internal experiences, because it was dual POV, which I also really liked. It was just very relatable. So, next is books that made you cry. And the answer to that is always several. I've already talked about Angelica and the Bear Prince. I've already talked about The Proposal. I'm certain that there are lots of others, but the one that I wrote down to talk about for this prompt was Lunar Boy. And this is a middle grade graphic novel that focuses on a boy that was found on a moon. He's adopted by one of the people on the spaceship and comes out as a boy, as trans, after he's been on there for a little while. And then kind of once he gets used to this new place, he has to go back to kind of the mainland. I don't remember if it's Earth or a different planet or what have you. But his mom is going to be married into a family. So he has to get used to being in a totally different place with totally different people and getting to know folks who are also, on top of all of this, grieving the loss of their mom who died. Their mom was his mom's best friend and died a while back, and that's how her and the stepdad are connecting. I really love this book for a lot of reasons. I think, like, kind of outside of some of the character-y stuff, the sci-fi element was neat, and a lot of it is based on Indonesian culture. But what really, the two of the big things that really got me with this, one was the discussion of, like, mixed family, and especially a family that is mixed in, like, a more complicated way. Like, it's not just a story about adoption. It's not just a story about divorce or intermarrying or whatever. It has a lot of layers to it, which, while that specific experience isn't mine, I do come from a really blended family, and you just don't really see a whole lot of that. I feel like if I see anything approaching that, it's usually just either somebody's getting divorced or somebody's getting remarried, and that's kind of it. So I thought that was really cool. And really the thing that made me cry, I think the other bit wasn't as emotional. The thing that really got me was what I think was, I interpreted it as discussion of suicidal ideation. Throughout this, he gets calls to go back to the moon. Like, he can feel the moon kind of basically saying you can just forget all this and return back to how you were before, and you don't have to endure the pain that you're in. And, I think that could be a metaphor also for just like kind of general depression and stuff like that. There are a few different ways to read it, but that part was really intense and really effective. And then we have A Book That Made You Happy. And I think for that, I'm going to put Chef's Choice. This is one that there were just so many quirks about it that I really loved, that I think I was willing to overlook some of the stuff in the book that was, could have been helped out a little bit. Like, I just really loved the main character. I liked a lot of the astrology references. It helps that she's a Pisces. I'm also a Pisces, though I cannot imagine getting with a Capricorn, but that's her prerogative, not mine. But I don't know. There were so many just little bits and bobs, and it's kind of cheesy. Especially like, I don't know, some of the stuff about the love interest being French got a little bit much, but I was just in such a good mood from so much of the rest of the book that it didn't feel cheesy. It just felt like, I don't know, it was really good. I had a great time with it. And I'm sure when I do my more complete wrap up, I can talk kind of in more detail, but it was just a really fun time, I think. Next, we can move on to questions adjacent to TBR. So first I have new release that you haven't read yet, but really want to. And that is going to be The Secret World of Briar Rose. I actually picked up the arc from work. I was so stoked to get it. And I started to read the first chapter. It was just not a good day to have picked it up because it immediately goes into the character that has lost her sister. And I was just not ready to look at sibling grief. And so I've been a little bit scared to pick it back up. But I think whenever I do pick it up on the right day, it's going to be really impactful. I've loved hearing Cindy talk about it, and I think it's going to be one that I really like. I just haven't tried to dig my toes back in quite yet. And then the next question asks about your most anticipated release in the second half of the year. And there are a few things that are coming out that I'm excited for, but I think the book that I'm going to choose to really answer this is The Girl Who Became King by Melissa King. This is a memoir by one of the winners of Top Chef. She actually got in the top on Top Chef one year and then won on a different year. Top Chef was one of the things that I was like rewatching during lockdown, and just something about Melissa. She is adorable, first of all. She made tiramisu that made a grown man cry. And also just the way that she's able to take really simple things and elevate them. But then I also saw that off of the show, she talked a lot about like being queer. I ended up buying some of her merch, and I don't know, I just really like her for whatever reason, so I'm excited to actually be able to read her memoir. And then after that, there are books to read by the end of the year. Your guess is as good as mine. I have so many things that I would love to read. I've already talked about The Secret World of Briar Rose. I also have some vampire books I would like to read. These are recent acquisitions, so I have a plan in my head of reading probably this one first, Vampires at Sea, because it looks like it's going to be campy and silly. And then Thirst, which is supposed to be a little bit more like serious and gothic. And then maybe also then reading Carmilla and Interview with Vampire. We will see if any of that happens, but I would love this idea. Obviously, I still want to focus on different things for my personal curriculums. A Queer and Pleasant Danger by Kate Bornstein. I think I really want to get to next in my cults and extreme beliefs topical TBR that I have going on. A lot of different things kind of going on. I'm also in the middle of reading several things that I'm excited about, but we would just be here all day if I rattled off all of those. So trust, I have books that I want to read. Realistically speaking, I don't know which ones I will read and which ones I won't, but it'll be a good time either way. So, that is a little snapshot of what I've been reading so far this year and what might come next year. In the comments, let me know about some of your favorites this year. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.